I almost didn't start this business. Not because I didn't have the knowledge, not because I didn't have the drive, not because I didn't care deeply about the families I wanted to help. I almost didn't start because my brain, my ADHD brain, told me for 10 years I wasn't ready yet. If you have an ADHD brain or you're raising one, you already know this feeling. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of motivation. It's something much more specific than that. And it's something most people around you have probably never been able to name for you. It sounds like this. I'll start when I know more. I'll launch when it's ready. I'll share this when I've figured out that one last piece. And that one last piece never comes. Because the ADHD brain doesn't experience ready the way other brains do. It experiences a moving threshold. Every time you get close, the bar shifts, the goal line moves, and you're left standing there more prepared than ever, absolutely certain you're still not enough. I know, because I lived there, and it started a lot earlier than I realized. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. Those are real disclaimers and they both stand. But they're also not just legal protection. These are things I've found to be true from 25 years in classrooms, from raising a bonus son with dyslexia, and from living in my own ADHD brain every single day. This is my experience and what the research shows. Always consult your child's medical team for medical decisions. Here's what I know that I didn't know then. That wasn't a character flaw. That wasn't a lack of discipline. That was my ADHD brain doing exactly what ADHD brains do, using perfectionism as a shield against the one thing that terrifies us most, being seen and found lacking. And the only thing that broke it wasn't more preparation. It wasn't another degree. It wasn't waiting until everything was in place. It was action. Imperfect, uncomfortable, not ready yet action. Here's exactly what I'm going to walk you through today. First, the actual brain science behind why ADHD brains get trapped in perfectionism. Not that you're too hard on yourself, the real neuroscience. Second, what the ADHD brain is actually afraid of underneath all that waiting. There's a name for it, and once you know it, you'll see it everywhere. Third, what does medication actually do in the ADHD brain? And what can't it do? Because this is the part nobody talks about, honestly enough. And fourth, the 2 to 3 year journey of imperfect action that finally broke the loop for me, including why this studio you might see behind me is the punctuation at the end of a very long sentence, not the beginning of it. Stay with me. If you're sitting on something right now, a business, a conversation, a decision, a dream that you keep telling yourself isn't ready yet, this might be the one thing that finally gets it out of you. Kelly Sutherland, National Board Certified Teacher and Reading Specialist with 25 years in classrooms across multiple states. I have ADHD. I was the one who had to front and center as close to the front as possible, taking obsessive notes and building systems no one else needed. Not because I was extra diligent, but because my brain required a GPS to navigate what other people could hold in their heads. I didn't fully understand that until much later than I should have. And that delay, that gap between who I was and who I thought I needed to be, cost me 10 years of work that should already be out in the world. If this is landing for you, go ahead and hit subscribe. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcast, this channel and this podcast exists for exactly this kind of conversation. Let's get into it. Why does the ADHD brain confuse not ready with not enough? Here's the scene inside of the ADHD brain when it's staring down something it wants to do. You have the idea. You can see it. You can feel what it's supposed to be. But the moment you go to start, something locks. The brain raises a flag, not a stop flag, more of a wait. We're not sure about this flag. And for an ADHD brain, that flag gets interpreted as danger. So instead of starting, the brain looks for a way to make the danger go away. And the most logical solution, get more ready. Learn more, prepare more, make it more certain before you begin. Think of it like driving with a foggy windshield. You know where you're going. You can see the general shape of the road, but everything is just blurred enough that your hands grip the wheel tighter and you slow way down, not because you forgot how to drive, but because your brain won't let you move at full speed when it can't see clearly. For the ADHD brain, that fog never fully lifts. You're always waiting for the defroster to kick in, and sometimes it does, but only after you start driving. Or think of it like radio static. You can hear the song underneath, you know it's there, you can almost make out the melody, but the static is loud enough that you just keep adjusting the dial instead of just singing along with what you can hear. The ADHD brain keeps adjusting, keeps fine-tuning, keeps waiting for the signal to come in perfectly clear before it will let you start. For the neurotypical brain, this is a brief pause. For the ADHD brain, this pause can last years. Here's what the research actually shows. ADHD involves differences in the brain's dopamine and norepinephrine systems, specifically in the prefrontal cortex, which governs planning, self-regulation, and the ability to begin tasks without needing to know the outcomes. Research by Dr. Amy Arston at Yale and corroborated by peer-reviewed work in neuropsychopharmacology has shown that when these systems are dysregulated, the prefrontal cortex loses its ability to regulate behavior and emotion effectively, which means the brain compensates by raising what researchers call the perceived threshold for action. The task has to feel worth it, certain enough, safe enough, before the brain will allow the body to start. A 2024 study published in the Feb's Journal confirmed that dopamine and norepinephrine dysregulation in ADHD directly impacts the executive function networks responsible for initiating goal-directed behavior. Perfectionism in the ADHD brain isn't about high standards. It's a neurological coping mechanism. The brain trying to manufacture certainty in the only way it knows how. Jessica McCabe, the creator of How to ADHD on YouTube and author of the New York Times bestseller by the same name, puts it plainly. Perfectionism and the anxiety that goes hand in hand with it can keep us from getting started or keep us stuck in mental loops. That's not a productivity problem. That's a wiring problem. And it has nothing to do with how capable you are. For those of us who are late identified or unidentified in childhood, we didn't know that was what was happening. We just thought we weren't ready. We thought we needed one more thing, one more degree, one more credential, one more yes from someone we trusted. So the first thing I want you to do right now, before you even finish this video, is name one thing you've been waiting to do. Not fix it, not start it, just name it. Because naming it is the first step out of the loop. You can't address what you haven't acknowledged. But naming it is just the beginning. Because once you know what you're waiting on, there's a deeper question underneath it that most ADHD adults have never been asked. Let's talk about that next. What is the ADHD brain? actually afraid of when it waits for perfect. For me, the waiting didn't start when I decided to build this business. It started a lot earlier than that. I can trace it back to middle school. That's when I started getting serious, really serious about my future, about proving myself, about making sure that nobody could look at my work and find it lacking. By high school, the loop was already operational. By college, it was running the show. I was afraid of being seen as not enough. And that fear had a name, though I didn't know it at the time. It's called Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, RSD. It's one of the most common and most undertreated experiences in adults with ADHD. It's an intense, almost physical response to the perceived possibility of being criticized, rejected, or found lacking. It doesn't require actual rejection. The possibility is enough to trigger the full emotional response. My RSD didn't look like hiding under a blanket. It looked like achievement. I ran into challenges early in my teaching career, students whose needs I couldn't fully meet, and that drove me to learn more. I went back to school. Then again, then again, a master's degree in brain-based teaching and learning, then a specialist degree, national board certification, then reading specialist credentialing. All real accomplishments, all worthy things, all things I genuinely love and I'm deeply grateful for because I love learning. That part was real. And at the same time, all of them, at least in part, were my ADHD brain's attempt to build a wall high enough nobody could criticize what was behind it. Research on perfectionism and ADHD is very clear on this pattern, especially in women and girls who are disproportionately undiagnosed in childhood and spend years developing what psychologists call compensatory perfectionism. When you grow up with a brain that keeps getting the message, you're not quite right, from grades, from teachers, from well-meaning adults who just couldn't understand why you work so hard and still fell short, the brain learns to overcompensate. So you become the most prepared person in the room, the one with the most credentials, the one who never says, I don't know, without immediately following it with a plan to find out. And it works for a while until you're standing there with everything you work for, wondering why it still doesn't feel like enough. Jessica McCabe describes it this way in How to ADHD. These judgments, even once I learned how inaccurate they are, even now that I understand the biology behind the invisible obstacles I kept tripping over and blaming myself for, are long solidified by decades of neural pathways wiring together and firing together. That's not a mindset problem. That's decades of wiring. And you can't think your way out of wiring. You have to act your way out. Attitude Magazine describes this as the perfectionism procrastination loop. Self-doubt feeds perfectionism. Perfectionism feeds procrastination. And the loop starts over. The brain isn't broken. It's doing its best with a wiring that was never explained to it. And if you're a woman watching this or a woman raising a daughter, I need you to hear something. Research published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that women with ADHD frequently arrived at their diagnosis only after years of being treated for anxiety, depression, or mood disorders first, a pattern called diagnostic overshadowing, where the masking behaviors hide the real root cause. A world first study out of Monash University's Hearst Center in Australia, published in January 2026, confirms systematic misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis of ADHD females specifically. We are being missed at staggering rates. There's a full series coming to this channel about what ADHD and dyslexia look like in girls and women. Subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. Here's the reframe that began to change things for me. The credentials were never going to be enough, not because I wasn't enough, but because the goal was never the credentials. The goal was certainty. And the ADHD brain left unaddressed will always find a reason certainty hasn't arrived yet. The only exit from the loop isn't more proof. It's a different question. And I'm going to show you exactly what that question is and how I actually found the answer. But before we get to the moment that broke the loop, there's something I need to talk about honest, because a lot of people hear ADHD brain and immediately think, just take the medication. And the truth about what medication can and can't do is something I wish someone had told me a long time ago. Let me walk you through it. What does medication actually do in the ADHD brain? And what can't it do? This is the section where I need to be really honest with you. I'm not a doctor. I said that at the beginning, and I mean, medication decisions belong to you and your child's medical team. But I've lived this, both as someone with ADHD and as an educator who has watched medication work beautifully in some cases and fall short in others. And what I've learned is that the conversation about medication is often missing the most important piece. Here's what I mean. When medication works, it works because it addresses the brain's chemistry piece, the dopamine and norepinephrine regulation we talked about in section 1. Some medications work by increasing dopamine availability. Others, like the non-stimulant medication, worked by strengthening the prefrontal cortex's ability to use norepinephrine more effectively, which helps with focus, impulse control, and emotional regulation, without the on and off effects some people experience with stimulants. Either way, the goal is the same. Lower the perceived threshold for action. Help the brain feel safe enough to start. Quiet the static enough that you can hear the song. That's real, that matters, and I'm not going to dismiss that for a second. But here's what medication doesn't do. And this is the part that gets lost. Medication doesn't teach skills. Research consistently shows medication improves the brain's capacity for attention and self-regulation. It does not directly improve executive function skills, the strategies a child needs to actually use that improved attention. It doesn't teach you where the folder goes or how to get the homework from the backpack to the teacher's desk. It doesn't teach a child how to start a task they find boring, or how to organize their materials, or how to sit with frustration long enough to push through it. Those skills have to be explicitly taught and practiced. The medication creates the window. Someone still has to teach what goes in it. I've watched this play out in my classroom more times than I can count. A child gets on the right medication, and suddenly they can focus, and everyone exhales. The parents are relieved, the teachers are relieved, the child is relieved. But 3 weeks later, the child still can't find their homework. Their desk is still a chaotic pile of loose papers and broken pencils and yesterday's snack wrapper. The backpack is still a black hole where assignments go to die. The medication quieted the noise, but nobody taught them the systems. And that gap between what medication can do and what still needs to be learned is where so many families get stuck. They think medication was supposed to fix everything. And when it doesn't, they think something's wrong with the child or something is wrong with the medication, when really the medication did exactly what it's designed to do. The skills piece was always a separate job. That's the brain chemistry, the perfectionism loop, the years of wrong treatment or no treatment. All that is the context. Now I want to tell you about the moment everything actually shifted. If your child is on medication and you're still seeing gaps, you're not failing. The medication is doing its job. The skills are a different job. And that's exactly the kind of thing I break down in more detail on the blog. There's a companion post to this video with plain language science, specific questions to ask your child's doctor, and an honest look at what to expect and what not to. The link is in the description. Now, with all of that context in place, let me tell you about the moment the loop actually broke. Because it wasn't a mindset shift that happened in the moment. It was a decision I made about 2 to 3 years ago. And that decision changed everything. What finally breaks the perfectionism loop in the ADHD brain? About 2 to 3 years ago, I made a decision. I have been thinking about this business for close to a decade. I had the knowledge, I had the experience. I had more credentials than most people in this space. And I'd been living in my head, planning, researching, refining, while the families I wanted to help kept waiting. And I remember the shift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a moment of lightning clarity. It was more like I finally got tired of my own. Casey Morris of the CEO Teacher talks about the idea that action brings clarity. I first heard it from her, and it became the truest thing I know about how the ADHD brain actually gets unstuck. Not think your way to clarity, not plan your way to clarity, act your way there. So I started acting. I got a website. It wasn't perfect. I started creating YouTube videos. And if you go back and watch the early YouTube videos, I'll be honest with you, they're not great. The lighting is off, the framing is off. I'm still figuring out how to be on camera. That's pretty evident today. But they exist. And they exist because I put action behind the idea instead of waiting until the idea was polished enough to be worth acting on. And something happened that I didn't expect. The action brought clarity, just like Casey said it would. Every video I made taught me something about what I was trying to say. Every blog post I published taught me something about who I was trying to reach. Every system I built for my classroom and then at home taught me something about what actually works for the ADHD brain in the real world, not just in theory. The clarity didn't come before the action. It came because of it. Here's what the research shows about why this works for the ADHD brain specifically. Jessica McCabe writes in How to ADHD, "We don't need motivation to take action. In fact, it often happens in reverse. Action can generate motivation. For years, I've been waiting to feel motivated enough, ready enough to begin. But the ADHD brain doesn't work that way. Motivation follows action. Clarity follows action. Readiness is not a prerequisite, it's a result." This is the opposite of what most of us were taught. We were taught to have a plan before we started, to know the outcome before we committed, to be sure before we made. And for the ADHD brain, that instruction is a trap because certainty rarely arrives on its own. It has to be built step by imperfect step through the act of doing. The past 2 to 3 years, I've been building, not perfectly, not without setbacks, but consistently, action after action. I've been getting this out of me and into the world. I built the website. I published the blog post. I started the YouTube channel. I created the courses. I built the community. And last week, my son came over and helped me hang the sound panels in the home studio. He showed up with a tape measure and a leveler and little page tabs he used as spacers to try to get the gaps even. He measured, stepped back, and measured again, quietly solving the problem the way he solved every problem his whole life. With Legos, with construction projects, with every puzzle his brain ever decided was worth solving. And when the last panel went up, I stood there and looked at the space and thought, it's not finished, but it's done enough. The studio is not where the story begins. That studio is where you can see, finally, visibly, What 2 to 3 years of action looks like when it accumulates. It's the punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. Done enough to start. Done enough to record. Done enough to finally get out of me what has needed to get out for years. If you're sitting on something right now that has been waiting for perfect, I want you to ask yourself one question. Who is waiting for what I already know? Not who needs the finished version. Who needs the version you have right now? I'm not the best guru on any of this. I want to be clear about that. What I am is someone who's been in the storm, who's navigated pieces of it, who's come out the other side of some of it, and who can help the person behind me maybe not carry the same weight I carried for 10 years. That's what this is about. Not expertise from a distance, experience from inside. Every day I spent waiting for perfect was a day one of those families was waiting without help. That's what finally broke the loop for me. Not a system, not a credential, a shift in whose story this was really for. And I'm done waiting. Done enough is how it begins. You've earned that. I hope you hear me. You've earned the right to begin with what you have. And if something in this video made you think of the girl you used to be or the woman you're raising right now, I want you to know there's more coming. A full series on what ADHD and dyslexia look like in girls and women is in the works for this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss it. If this landed for you, I want to keep this conversation going. If you're watching this before June 9th, 2026, I'm hosting a free 5-day live event called Destination Success Bootcamp, June 9th through June 13th. It's built exactly for this moment. When you know what you want, but the path forward keeps feeling just out of reach. During the bootcamp week, you can also lock in the VIP Destination Success course at just $7. This will give you access to all the replays and materials. That price is only available during the bootcamp window. After that, the price goes up. And if you want the best value, the Family Learning Adventures membership includes the course, plus a full community, the resource vault, and everything we're building together at the founding member rate of $19.99 a month. That rate also goes away after the live event. Registration for the bootcamp is free and all links are in the description. It'll tell you exactly where to go. And if this video has helped you today, please share it with someone who needs it. Not someone who has it all figured out. Someone who's been waiting until they do. If you recognize yourself in the RSD section, the way rejection doesn't have to actually happen for your brain to react like it already did, there's a video on this channel that goes deeper into exactly that. What RSD looks like in daily life and how it shows up in your child and what actually helps. The link is in the description. I'm Kelly Sutherland, and I'll see you in the next one.